A tourist was visiting Zambia for the first time, and he booked into the Intercontinental Hotel, and he hadn't been there very long, and he thought it was time to go down to the dining room and get a drink and a spot of food. So he went down and sat at the table and waited for the waiter to come, and the waiter didn't come, which puzzled him a bit because he could see a group of 4 waiters over the other side of the restaurant, but they were busy amongst themselves. So he put up his hand, to attract their attention, but they were too busy talking amongst themselves, probably discussing how the president, with his dreadful record, could win the next election. And so he put up his hand again and he said, "Waiter, waiter!" Nothing. Nothing. They were still busy talking to themselves. They didn't even look up. So he shouted, "Waiter, waiter, I want service. Can you bring the menu?" Nothing. He got exasperated, desperate, bad-tempered. He got up on his chair and he stood on the table and he banged his feet and he waved his arms and he says, "Waiter, waiter, will you come here? I want some service." One of them looked over at him and said to the others, "Who does he think he is? He must be going mad. Just ignore him." So the end of that was that he had to get down from the table, down from the chair. He got down on the ground and he walked out to make a complaint with the general manager. And that's the end of that little story. Now, let's examine that little story and what does it tell us? Well, let's look at the upside to start with. Let's try to see it from his point of view. I mean, he thinks that if he goes in a restaurant, he's the king, he's got a MasterCard in his pocket, he's come from a place where the waiter immediately comes running and he wants some service and he feels really aggrieved. He may even see it as a power issue. He thinks he's the one in charge, and the waiter thinks, all of the waiters think they're in charge, and they're going to show him who's the boss. And he was trying to show that he was the boss. He didn't realize he's come to such an egalitarian country as Zambia, where the waiters definitely have the idea they're as good as anybody else. And if you're not very polite to them, and if you don't behave yourself, you will get nothing, nothing. But what's the downside of all this? Well, let's face it, he did make rather an ass of himself. Maybe it's a culture clash. He's come from a different culture, and he doesn't seem to be able to adjust himself. But also, he has failed to appreciate that being in a different country, he should sort of accommodate himself within a rather different situation, rather than bring his own cultural values of the great power of the MasterCard and having money when the waiters are very poor and supposed to come scurrying to him to find out what he wants. And yet, I think we can all recognize this incident in ourselves, because we all do get annoyed at some point when we see ourselves being treated unjustly as we see it, or we see other people being treated unjustly, and we think we all ought to do something about it. Now, our tourist is foolish because it is a minor issue and he's gone over the top and he's done something too quick. But on the other hand, we're all in danger of the opposite of acting, not doing something. So we all have this problem of where is your cracking point? Where do you complain? Where do you take action? When should you do something? For instance, if I'm walking through Calendar Square, Stage 1, on my way to my favorite watering hole, and there in the dim dark near a garden wall, I see a man bashing his woman or his wife, whoever it is. Now, what do? Do I walk past saying this is a domestic matter, nothing to do with me? Or do I take issue and say, what do you think you're doing? Bearing in mind that I'm a senior citizen and rather frail, and might finish up in a worse mess than his beloved. So, probably I scurry on. It's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. So, not make a fuss. But what about it in the office at the workplace? You see a senior manager. You can see on a daily basis that this man is mistreating his secretary. There's sexual harassment going on. What do? You just pretend you can't see it. It's not my problem. It's nothing to do with me. If she's aggrieved, then she should be doing something. So you just accommodate yourself within the situation. Or you're working in the bank and you find out that the members of the board of the bank are misusing their position and they're ordering the managing director to give them huge loans. They're squandering the shareholders' money and the depositors' money. They're not providing the proper collateral. They're being given too much. They're way outside the regulations. What do? Do you whistle blow? Do you take it to the newspaper? Or you say, well, it's not my bank. I'm not going to ruin my promotion prospects. It's not my problem. I'll just keep quiet about this. Where is your sticking point? At what point do you say, this is an injustice, I must say something and do something? And if we take action, what is the basis of that action? Number one, we all have our own morals. Even me, who's not a Christian or anything, but I mean, I do have some sense of what's right and wrong. I'm a sort of atheistic Christian, I suppose. Still got a secular remnant of what I was once taught. Now, if I'm looking at things which I know from my moral standpoint are wrong, why am I putting up with it? Why can't I say something? So that is the first thing. If you don't, what is a person who claims moral values, but when they are traduced, when he sees injustice against others, even himself, he just knuckles down, he remains a rat. But he's also a hypocrite. That's what we mean by a hypocrite. You have values, but they don't translate into actual action. You claim one thing, but what you claim about what you believe doesn't influence how you behave when things are going wrong. This is more so, of course, when we look at the whole societal thing. It's not just an individual problem, it's a society problem. Most of all because we live under governments that take our money and misuse it all over the world, especially this part of the world. So we all have we have an individual citizen's duty, but it's a social duty to watch what the government is doing and criticize and complain and to take action and to protest when we see that they are taking our money and instead of spending it on us, they're spending it on themselves and living a grand life while ordinary people starve. And the need to hold power to account is part of the structure of our society. We have a parliament which is supposed to be the watchdog of society. Although in some places, the parliament is so extremely bought off that they don't blow the whistle, they just drink the gin and tonic. So who does it fall upon? It falls upon civil society. Well, it also falls upon the church, but for all their moral values, they're usually not much use. So it falls on civil society, and it also falls on other sections of society, especially the business community, especially banks and banking corporations and so on. Although it is a most unfortunate trend all around the world that businesses say, we're non-political. We don't care about politics. We're separate from that. Provided the government's stable, provided it's predictable, we'll live with any political environment. All we want is economic stability and no rapid change. So we can't intervene or join the political discourse. That's what they claim. Well, actually, they're not non-political, because if you happen to go to a supper party of the managing director of a bank, not that I often get invited, but you will find these people are too talkative about politics. They're very political. They have trenchant opinions. They tend to be very skeptical, if not cynical. So they are political animals in their personal lives, but not in their social lives, not in the public life. And they're not non-political in their actions because they do prevail upon government to reduce import taxes on those things they want to import, or to reduce the royalties on the minerals, or to entirely cancel the windfall tax. They have quiet diplomacy and threatening diplomacy, and they are very political animals, but they're acting in their own personal interests and in the corporate interests, and they're not acting in the public interest and the national interest. So, where does this holding power come from? It resides in talkative people, difficult people, awkward people, and it also resides in the press. If Parliament doesn't work, the next thing is the press. Except in many countries, including this one, most of the press is owned by the government. And guess what? A media owned by the government is not to be found criticizing the government. In fact, they're employed to disseminate government information. In other words, government legitimation and propaganda. So, let me conclude with another little story. Unfortunately, my own, so you can have an even bigger laugh this time. I myself, 20 years ago, accidentally started a column in a newspaper. I won't tell you about the accident, but I wasn't supposed to be a writer or a journalist or anything, but it happened. Things do. 1996, just after the country was attempting to build a democratic society after 27 years of awful dictatorship. And Of course, this was in the Post, the fairly new then independent newspaper, which was the only sort of paper that would want to publish myself. And what did I do? I started off with a weekly story, just about 700 or 800 words. And each week I would take something about government behavior, which I thought was unjust and wrong. It was always very easy to find. But I didn't, get into I did get into a rage about it, but, people don't want to read rage. It's boring. So, and it also puts you in jail fairly quickly. So I wrapped up my dissatisfaction. I sublimated my rage into a bit of petty literature and a bit of humor and made up a little story which indirectly sort of veiled criticism of the government. And I got away with this. Actually, mostly, this is another funny thing. So people are so frightened of the government, but you can actually criticize them. And I got away with this, would you believe, for 8 years. Until one morning, my editor rang me up at about 10 o'clock in the morning and said, Roy, he said, there's a protest against you in town. The party cadres are I can't do it, can I? The party cadres, hundreds of them, are toying around town, and they're bearing a huge black coffin with your name on it. And then they have been to visited the office, or the courtyard, or the car park outside the office of the Minister of Home Affairs, and they have asked him to have you deported. So the editor said, you must immediately go into hiding. Do you know of a safe house somewhere? And I said, yeah, well, I'll think of something. And then I went and spoke to my dear wife, Sarah. So I got hold of Sarah and I said, look, we're in trouble. There's a deportation order. We've got to move out quick. The immigration people should have been at my house already. There's one nice thing about Zambia, Kaunda attempted to build this totalitarian state, but in practice it was so dreadfully inefficient. So the immigration hadn't arrived, so we got in the car and we drove straight off, and Sarah said, well, where are we going? I said, well, I thought we would decide that on the way. So we chose a friend of ours, with suitable arrangements, a guest wing and a swimming pool and a bar and that sort of thing. I don't know how we've managed to acquire one or two friends like that. It's another accommodation strategy instead of standing up to injustice, I suppose. The editor got hold of a lawyer and took the case to a judge, and a judge agreed on a judicial review. But nonetheless, we were holed up in our safe house for a full 10 days while the judge tried to explain to the Minister of Home Affairs, who probably wasn't very bright or was otherwise deliberately awkward, trying to explain to him what a court injunction meant and that the detention order had been stayed while he considered the case. So we were all locked up in our safe house for 10 days, me very frightened, but then Sarah's very good with me when I burst into tears and so on. And then one day, I got another telephone call from the editor, and he said, Roy, we've had a message from State House. Because there was a big furore. There was a big thing, this, I was in the news. It was very good for me because, people that had never read me before were reading me in the newspaper. And even from my even from my spider hole, I was still writing my piece. He said, had a phone call from State House, and they say, if you will just go to the president and apologize, it will lift the deportation order, it'll all be over, and you can proceed as before. And I said, well, can't do that. I said, I can't apologize because I don't think I've done anything wrong. I'm entitled to write like this. You know, one should be able to criticize the government even more forthrightly than I did. And what had I done, by the way? The thing was, I'd written a story about a rather foolish, bad-tempered elephant who was that was in charge of a big game park. And the president, although not normally an imaginative person, had managed to see himself in this elephant. That was the whole problem. I said, no, I can't apologize because I'm entitled to write things like that. I thought to myself, if people are not willing to be joked about, you know, if you can't make fun of the president, then it's a person who shouldn't go into politics in the first place because that's what's going to happen to you. And secondly, I said, I can't apologize because now I've become some temporary symbol of the freedom of the press. And if I climb down, I've let down all my friends. You know, they think I've stretched the space a bit. And now if I climb down, I've let everybody down because all journalists need to do this sort of thing. And then I said, thirdly, I can't do it because I don't trust the government. If I go out from my safe house, they'll probably grab me anyway and take me to the airport. So I'm going to continue to get the protection of the judge and see if he can reverse the deportation order. And also, I didn't say it, but I thought, my God, if I apologize, won't I look silly, you know? 'Cause, you know, I've been doing this little brave bit of writing, and then as soon as the president huffs and puffs and tells me to apologize, I say, oh, sorry, sir, sorry, won't do it again. And I wouldn't have been able to do it again, would I? I might as well just stop the column. Everybody would have pissed themselves laughing. So in the event, in the fullness of time, the Minister of Home Affairs stopped getting all his security forces scouring the country. I got out of my safe house. In the fullness of time, the judicial review took place. The judge looked at it all and he found about 13 different reasons why I should not be deported and quashed the deportation order. And I had held power to account in my little way. And I had done it, and I had won. And I had refused to apologize. So it shows that it can be done, and we needn't all be frightened and accommodate within the system, and we can defend ourselves. And governments are very sensitive to criticism. I found that out too. They're very sensitive, they're very pompous, they're very proud of themselves, and when you tell them there's something, you've done something wrong, they get very angry and annoyed. And if you laugh at them, they get even more annoyed because they're very pompous. So I do think, you know, that my particular case shows that you can tackle the government on particular issues where you feel injustice is done by all of us. The lessons show what? Choose something which is a good moral issue. Choose an issue which is popular, where you get support. Speak from a good support base. In my case, the newspaper, which was excellent. And I got lots of public support. And lastly, choose an area which is defensible in law and in court. So I don't think you have to be strategic about where you criticize and how you do it and who you get around you. And I say this in retrospect because in my case, I didn't expect anything like that. There was nothing strategic about it. And for some time, it looked as if I'd been caught very embarrassingly with my trousers down. But I've got them up now. Only just. But you might wonder if you look at the Hamlet example, where, this is the issue between whether you're going to stand up as a human, and tackle the elephant and become really human, or if you're going to live like a rat and, as a rat, lick the boots of the mighty and not squeak at least any louder than a rat. So I had my moment of glory of standing up as a human and not being as a rat, but that was 12 years ago. So you might legitimately ask me now, well, while you were still there standing up as a human, and before you slipped back to being a rat, why didn't you march bravely to the grave so you could go to heaven with an honorable record, which is a very good point. And I said so. I said to the Lord, only the other week, I said, I did that brave thing. I stood up as a human, but can you please take me to the grave, because I think I'm slipping down into submission and not making enough trouble. He said, don't worry, Roy, I'll be taking you soon. I just want you to hang on a bit longer so you can explain all this to TEDx. And now I've done that, so now you know where I'm going, and what a relief.